everybody. My name is Aaron. I'm from an organization called Freedivers, which is www.freedivers.net. That's our website. I'm an ADA trainer, yeah, and instructor trainer, and we train all levels of freedivers from beginner to the elite athlete. I also run a program called Remote Coaching, which you can find on our website, which basically deals with people who either have a specific problem or need a training program or have specific training issues. Okay, tonight we have a question, and a very good question, from Stephen Jones, who I believe is from New York. He's asked a very good question. He presents a situation where recently he went to Dahab, and there were people diving to 55 meters constant weight and only achieving approximately 30 meters in constant weight, no fins. And in each case, they were stopped by equalization issues. The situation that he's describing is that they were doing Frenzel technique, and it's not clear to me whether it was Frenzel with mouthfill or just plain Frenzel. It's also not clear whether the constant weight was constant weight with a bifin or constant weight with a monofin. However, these are details. Let's deal with this issue. Why the difference here in equalization between, here my equalization is fine till 55 meters in constant weight, where suddenly I don't have any more air and can't bring up any more air. And I can only do, I get exactly the same sensation at about 30 meters in constant weight, no fins. Look, it's very, very hard to give a specific answer to a situation where there are so many variables and unseen variables that it's guesswork. But I'm going to go into guesswork because even with the guesswork, I feel that there is something to be learned here. Let's begin at the beginning. First of all, I don't recommend Frenzel for deep divers. An awful lot of people have a great deal of problem with Frenzel because what they do in effect is that they tend to swallow their air. Every time they move their tongue, they leak air a little bit back into their lungs. So they get frantic about epiglottis control and then coordinating it with soft palate and all sorts of things, and they get into a whole mental mess that it's very difficult to get out of. So let me begin by saying that we do not recommend for deep divers the Frenzel combined with a mouthfill. Some people can do this, and for some people it's successful. For an awful lot of people it's an invitation to disaster and possibly even unsafe. Because if you leave air recovery after you've lost the mouthfill too late, the action of recovering air is too violent, and very often it can lead to a trachea squeeze, which is not something that you want. I know people who've had habitual trachea squeezes. The symptoms are that they come up coughing, and they're coughing blood, tiredness, difficulty in breathing, all the rest of it. You can read all about it on the internet under trachea squeeze. It's not something I recommend. In order to avoid this, as I say, We teach a version of the mouthfill where you don't move your tongue at all. Having said that, let's look at several other factors here and take the question that he's asking in his terms a little bit more seriously. Look, first of all, with constant weight, whether it's constant weight with a bifin or constant weight with the monofin, you're only exercising the lower half of your body. Therefore, the stresses on the upper part are less and it's easier to equalize. But we can balance these factors. The difference may be there still, but it shouldn't be as pronounced as a 20 or 25 meter difference. There's something else going wrong here. Now, to isolate what's going wrong, we have to look at several factors. First of all, he was given a very good piece of advice by Natalia Molchanova, who said the key to all this is relaxation. Yeah, she's right. And the deeper one goes, the more one knows that she's right. The difficulty is that relaxation isn't just from a mental command, relax. Relaxation can only happen when we have a lot of groundwork in place. We have the techniques of equalization at depth in place. We have confidence in our breath hold. We have confidence in our style. We understand and can also deliver our tactical plan. When all these things are in place and we have confidence because our training has been gradual, methodical, progressive, in realizable increments, then we can begin to talk about relaxation. Relaxation when we're making big jumps into the unknown, when we're not sure about our mastery of techniques, when we have no idea of what we even mean by a tactical plan. All these things, of course, complicate the issue and would require a trainer, or at least a very knowledgeable partner, to be with you to see what was actually missing in the picture and what was going wrong, what was stopping you. There is no real reason for this. Yes, it's true that constant weight in the fins is more effort. It does involve more of the whole body than constant weight does. Nevertheless, it has certain advantages of its own. One of the factors that we have to take as understood is the question of style. If somebody is wrestling with style and expending a tremendous amount of energy because of poor style, go back and work on style before you even begin, because that's it right there. You should be working out your style issues over the winter in a swimming pool where you know exactly how many movements it takes you to do 50 meters, how many movements it takes you to do 25 meters, etc., etc. And within a certain speed. On our blog, let's deal with the rest of the issues. Let's suppose for a moment that style isn't the problem. We have all kinds of other factors coming in. Weighting, And of course, the big issue, tactics and equalization itself. Just recently I wrote, well, yesterday actually, I wrote up a whole month's training that I've been doing with a very advanced UK freediver, a no fins man, who has, in my opinion, tremendous potential. He has a personal best of 68 meters. Up until October last year, he was purely self-taught, and he was struggling with equalization issues. He was doing the usual Frenzel, and the Frenzel wasn't really doing it for him. He ran out of air. He was fighting with air recovery, how much, when, where, and then the whole business of, well, I'm losing my mouthfill too early, so it must be soft palate control, it must be epiglottis control. And then having read Eric's magnificent article and understood that the epiglottis and the soft palate are paired, he was getting into all kinds of contortions, trying to coordinate these movements in his mouth. The most successful equalization is, of course, when you can absolutely forget it and it happens automatically. For that, we have to have an equalization that is suitable for you and easy. Frenzel is not the God-given key to everything. For some people it works, for a lot of other people it doesn't work, and some of the deepest divers aren't using it, or using versions and mixtures of their own. So I've dealt with this before. I don't want to go into it in depth again, but let's look at how we train for depth. And this may, Stephen, answer your question here. The first thing that I did with David was a continuation of what we were working on last October, which was working on totally empty lungs. I'm not a great believer in FRC. I think maybe it has its place. It's awfully hard to define, awfully hard to put an equivalent to on full lungs, because one time you're carrying a bit more air, another time you're carrying a bit less air, and it's impossible really to measure progress in this thing. So I have no great use for FRC. So this is totally empty lung. That means everything down to residual volume out, without reverse packing. Everything that you can possibly squeeze out of your lung, without reverse packing. Okay? Then you fill your cheeks on the surface and go. Now, we were building up gradually, because you have to do this gradually, methodically, and slowly at first, until you understand the equalization that's required of you. We built up gradually. One of the safety precautions that we insist on is that you do it without weights. Guys, if you're working empty lungs, it's a safety precaution to do it. Take off your weight belt, or if you have neck weights, take them off, put them in the buoy, forget about them during the whole period that you're doing empty lung. They can cause you to go too fast. If, God forbid, you had a blackout, you would sink like a rocket. They're not necessary, and also you can also get a much better measure of exactly how empty you are if you don't have empty sorry, I lost the plot there. Lay off the weight belt for empty lungs. Sorry, I noticed an incoming message and got distracted. Okay. So we were doing empty lung exercise, the empty lung repeats, which could be as many as 8 dives a day. And gradually we built up to going down to taking a single mouthfill from the surface down to 20 meters. And if you still can equalize at 20 meters from a mouthfill taken on the surface after a totally empty lung, we reckon we pretty much got the technique off pat. Now, David had been doing remote coaching with me over the winter and had a very consistent 7-minute static breath hold. So his tendency was to go down very slowly on empty lung. And so what we had to do to make sure that we had the technique was, the question that was unanswered here was, can you do it quickly? Okay. The next thing we moved to was something that we call drops. It's a head down variable where you grab the weight on the rope and you drop with the weight to the bottom, holding on to the weight, which is still attached to the rope, which is still attached, of course, to the buoy. When you're doing deep drops, we don't recommend that you do more than 2 or absolutely maximum, but not every day, 3 drops to 50 meters. When it gets to 60 meters, I tend to say 1 drop per day. That's it. That's a safety precaution. Now, what we're looking for in the drops is pacing. The funny thing is that as you go deeper, although the pressure differentials get smaller, your equalization has to be a little bit quicker. Here's another thing here, that when I didn't have a reading on the profile of the dive, but to give you an idea of the all over time, David's drops to 60 meters were averaging, the descent time was averaging 44 seconds. Which means that he's descending at well over a meter a second. So the equalization is going smoothly. So again, full lungs, if you can get from the surface to 60 meters on a drop without having to top up at all, then you've got pretty good epiglottis control, and we're ready to move on to the next steps, which will be the tactical steps. At which depth, for deeper dives, will I refill? And how far will that take me? Other things that we did for pressure inurement, because you're not doing all the time the same thing, gets boring, doesn't it? He was doing holds at depth. You have to be very careful with this, and you have to have good safety. I found myself on more than one occasion doing longer holds than I wanted to, at 30 or 35 meters, when David was down at 50 meters, doing up to 1 minute statics there, having pulled down. He was doing free immersion. Okay, so that has 2 points. That is basically introducing an element that wasn't in the drops of effort going down. And it's also giving you a sense of when to go into the glide and when you can start practicing your tactics. We prefer small top-ups frequently, that you never get down to the fact that you got no air left in the mouth. That's a situation that is nearly irrecoverable, and if you try too hard, you can do yourself serious mischief. So we try to avoid that. Stephen has put in a comment. That was the one that came in. I'm sorry, it distracted me for a minute. Saying that his constant weight was with a monofin. It was very relaxed. He was doing Frenzel with no special effort, whatever that meant, to do mouthfill. In other words, he was not attempting, as I read it, to take a giant mouthfill and use that. Basically, it shows a very, very good potential, and sorry to say it, but total lack of a coach. Because the whole point of the mouthfill was because the Frenzel is going to run out. I have met one person who had exceptional flexibility, an Englishman called Lee Donnelly, many years ago, who was doing 65 meters without mouthfill. Okay, he had the flexibility and the technique and the lock-up to be able to do it. Not everybody does. Hence, this was the whole idea of the mouthfill. The mouthfill allows us to go beyond the Frenzel depths. So this question is, in a certain way, answers itself, that you have pretty much reached, Stephen, the end of what is probably for you achievable with purely Frenzel. It's time to move on to a different technique. And when you're doing a different technique, then you have to think about tactics. Tactics are, when do I take the mouthfill? When do I top up? And very importantly, when do I go into the glide? Is it a two-part descent? That's to say that I'm making a effort up to the point that we call the point of non-deceleration. The point of non-deceleration means quite simply that when I stop all movement, I don't slow down my descent. Let's call that, for the sake of argument, something that I've always called it, the point of non-deceleration. You can get there are different philosophies and different tactics, which are applicable also to different disciplines. One of the things that is quite popular, particularly in the North American continent, is the idea of, particularly with a monofin, 8 forceful movements, 8 softer movements, so that's 16 movements altogether, and then go into the glide. There are other ways of looking at this thing. Years and years ago, somebody did research on how dolphins approach depths of 100 meters plus. And their technique is not all that different from what we're using today. The first part of the dive is, first part of the descent requires the most effort. They then go into a pattern of intermittent kick and glide, kick and glide. This is used very successfully if you see the movies, if you see the videos of William Trowbridge. His tactics for no fins are superb. He has the first part, continuous effort, and then he has a movement and glide, and a movement and a longer glide, and a movement and a longer glide still, until he reaches, so that's 2 phases, and the third phase is where he uses no movement at all and simply falls. So first of all, you have to decide whether you're going to use virtually a 2-stage descent or a 3-stage descent, and where and you're going to do what. And basically we like the idea in our training of counting movements. I'm not a great fan of technology. There have been some explanations for it. I'm a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are allergic to technology. In my book, Murphy is hidden in every technological device. Whatever can screw up inevitably does at some stage. I believe William had a little trouble with this in Vertical Blue last time. Last November, I believe he didn't hear an alarm, or the alarm didn't go off, or something like this. I don't want to be dependent on that. Yeah? I want to try and break away from all dependency in the divers that I train on artificial aids like that. Artificial aids have their place. They, if you have your nice D4, it allows somebody to monitor the dive after the dive. Yeah, plug it into the computer, see the profile, see what your speeds were at various depths, and that can help you alter things an awful lot, and alter your whole tactics. Right, another question's just come in. I'm going to take a break for a second to read this.
Read it out loud.
Right, it's by a guy called Andreas Pepper. He says, "Hi Aaron, this is a question regarding squeezes. On deeper blue, it is reproduced over and over again that squeezes can produce a structural weak spot, and by this make divers more prone to subsequent squeezes. Amen. Out of my own experience, I cannot support this idea, as I had a comparable compressive dives one day after each other, squeezing on the first but not on the second. To my experience, squeezes are produced by a subtle tension connected to doubts about anything. For example, if one's at a chance of squeezing. So my question is, if this is a structural or a physiological sensitivity we're dealing with. Both mechanisms could lead to experiences that support the idea that a squeeze is making someone prone to squeezes. Look, there's quite a lot of issues here, Andreas. The first thing is there are certain definite rules that will help to avoid squeezes as much as possible. the fact that a squeeze can still occur is indisputable. One of the things to avoid squeezes is a gradual, incremental and methodical and realizable approach to depth. Don't make big jumps in training. It's an absolute disease today that a lot of people are reaching incredibly high numbers in dynamic, either with fins or without fins, and they come to the sea and think that this is convertible immediately into depth. It isn't, and it can't be. There are a lot of other issues that you have to solve in depth. One of the main ones is equalization, and it's a big issue. The first thing is how we manage depth, gradually, methodically, incrementally. That's very important. I always say that we should never increase depth even by 1 meter until we're 100% sure that we can actually equalize on the bottom of the previous depth. I have on my website articles about my whole philosophy of approaching depth. It's very in line with my friend Claude Chapuis in France, who we seem to have a common language with over this. So that's the first part of this thing. Now, whether I know more than one person who have had repetitive squeezes, and whether due to scar tissue, because we're not dealing with lung squeezes here. Basically what we're dealing with is trachea squeezes. Let's be clear about that. A lung squeeze is much rarer. If you go coughing blood after a dive to nearly any doctor, including a diving doctor, he's going to tell you you've got a lung squeeze. Usually he's wrong. Usually the problem is a trachea squeeze. The color of the blood is different from a lung squeeze. It's a darker blood in the trachea. The symptoms are slightly different. You're much less likely to get a lung squeeze than a trachea squeeze. The trachea is cartilaginous, it's inflexible, or not greatly flexible, let's put it that way, and it is prone to squeezes, particularly if we're not managing our equalization issues correctly. So, let me deal with the single squeeze first. The single squeeze is usually the product of somebody who's making big jumps in depth. And if that is not the case, and they're still getting, by big jumps in depth, I mean, if you did 50 meters last year and you haven't dived for 11 months, yeah, don't come back and expect to do 50 meters on your first dive. Take it back to a comfortable depth and work back to where you were, and then methodically press on from there. So that's the first thing, and your biggest help in that one is your logbook. That's one of the biggies for avoiding a trachea squeeze. Next thing up the line is your tactics. What type of equalization you're using. I've just been talking about, I don't like using a Frenzel combined with a mouthfill, because an awful lot of people, every time they move their tongue to equalize with a Frenzel, they're actually slightly opening the epiglottis and allowing a leakage of air back into the lung. So they lose the cheek fill much too early. Yes, you can do epiglottis controls and all the rest of it, and you can do all the exercises until you're absolutely black in the face. The truth of the matter is, it may not solve the problem for you. You may have your time better invested by doing a different type of equalization. So the next thing, the next danger of getting a trachea squeeze is air recovery, when you've lost the mouthfill and you're trying to recover air to get in another few equalizations. There's not a lot of understanding about this. A lot of people leave it too late, they make the wrong movements, and they make too forceful movements, and the result is definitely a squeeze. This is all due to incorrect training and incorrect technique. Let's deal with the physiological part. I have noticed people with long, thin necks might, unless they have good flexibility, and very good flexibility, they might be more prone. There might be a physiological element here that makes them more prone to a trachea squeeze. Definitely one of the things that will help enormously, is flexibility, and particularly thoracic flexibility. I'm not a fan of packing and stretching. About as far as I'll go in that direction is actually stretching on a full lung but a non-packed lung. But apart from that, I am a very big fan of Udayana, the diaphragmic lift, emptying out all the air and lifting the diaphragm. And the more you can do that, you're actually at the same time contracting your intercostals, at the same time that you're lifting your diaphragm. You can be gaining an awful lot of flexibility in this, and this is a preventative for squeezes. There's no question about it. All the neck and head exercises and all the rest of them are also excellent for it. Squeezes for the upper part of the back. Hey guys, ladies on the whole are more flexible in the spine than we men are. A lot of men have fairly good flexibility in the lower spine, particularly when we're talking monofin. But the upper part of the spine, from about the level of the back ribs up, looks like a board with most men. And hence we have our ball exercises and everything else to open the whole back area, and we put a big emphasis in yogic exercises on back bends. And that has to be done under supervision. Does it have to be yoga? No. There are even exercises that you can do in a swimming pool that are entirely beneficial because they're without weight bearing. But work the flexibility. Now, on the question of can I develop a susceptibility to reoccurring trachea squeezes, first of all, if I get more than one, I have to ask myself why. This is not a normal, accepted state of affairs. It shouldn't happen. There is something going wrong. Find out what it is and fix it. And don't try to do that depth or deeper until you have fixed it. Now, it's true that, and Andreas, I agree with you here, it can come from all the things that I've named, and plus the thing that you named and that I haven't yet, which is mental tension. I relate back to Stephen's last question, where he said that Natalia Molchanova very wisely said to him, and I absolutely 1000% agree with her, that the secret to deep diving and deep equalization is relaxation. But here's a trick. That doesn't happen until we've set up all the conditions for it to happen, as I said before. So that's something that we have to check out. If we are tense in going down, I would suggest that first of all, be aware of the fact that you are tense while you're going down, and try and relax it. If you can't relax, abort the dive. As simple as that. Look, an awful lot of mental relaxation comes with the idea I am in control. And when I know I'm in control, I can forget about being in control. Nearly everything that happens, in a really good dive, in that one dive that you did where everything went right, nearly always the common denominator is, what was I thinking about? Nothing. It just happened. And it happened effortlessly. So intense preoccupation with one or another part of the dive, if you're really in that thing, change gear, don't do a deep dive today, go and do something else. Yeah, there's plenty of things that we can do to roll the ball forward without challenging that. And when we've set up all the conditions to feel relaxed, one of the things that we can do that gives us the sense of control is to check out. We can't check out mental relaxation too well unless we're really a master of the mind. But what we can check out is physical relaxation. Tension begins to creep in the feet. When you go down, you begin to get strange sensation in the feet. Hey guys, it's not unusual. That's called bloodshed. And very often it feels like oncoming cramps. One of the main things that we can do is check out any invasion of tension and get rid of it. Yeah, I got tension beginning to creep up in my legs. Loosen them. Loosen them. Yeah, I mean, okay, we've got all the autogenic training, which we're not allowed to use the word relax because the body doesn't understand relax, apparently. I think this might be also other types of mental training. Because in order to relax, the body has to check out tension first. That's one of the theories. I won't go into Richard Bandler or won't get into his pants in this one. However, tell yourself anything to soften the legs, to let the legs become heavy, anything you like. But basically the idea is you are controlling the invasion of tension creeping in. And you're looking for it in different parts of the body. You're monitoring yourself. That means, hey, I'm in control. After a time, that, like everything else that we're trying to do, goes on to the automatic pilot. And if we do things consistently enough, yeah, then we're building the strength of that automatic pilot. And the best dives occur when we're fully on the automatic pilot. We're not interfering with our monkey mind that's jumping around all over the place, and we're letting things happen. You can call it, if you like, the subconscious. The subconscious is a marvelous and incredibly precise machine. It's convinced me of its mastery time after time after time. And if we don't interfere and we allow it to take command, that's when the dive becomes pure pleasure, and when we're not having to think about, oh, my soft palate, oh, my epiglottis, oh, my... And I'm like a board after about 2 minutes, yeah? I'm just having fun. Okay, that comes a gradual approach, but an approach that still challenges. It's still prepared to accept discomfort. It's still prepared to go beyond a little bit. So you have to have you have to work on the psychological as well as the mental here. Right, we have another question. I'm going to scroll down and see this. Boom, 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 boom. I'm horrible at these things.
Okay.
That just came in?
Yep, Mateos. Mateos is asking, how can you train equalization in 4-meter pool?
Okay, how can you train equalization in a 4-meter pool? Matt, I thought we discussed this. Either I've got Alzheimer's or you have. Okay, basically what you do is this. If you've only got a 4-meter pool, try and rig up something that you can pull yourself down using your hands. Either a rope, or alternatively a pole, or somebody holding one of the cleaning poles for the pool, and you pull yourself down that. Okay? Now, the challenge is this. We empty out without, I don't like reverse packing. We're not wearing weights for this. We're doing head down descents to the bottom. We're emptying out absolutely all our air on the surface. Yeah? And then what we're doing is we're pulling down the rope or pole with cheeks that we filled on the surface, yeah, to the bottom. And the objective on the bottom is to arrive with still a lot of air in the cheeks. And start counting your equalizations to there. Now, when you're on the bottom, grasp the rope with your feet so that you don't go flat. You're still in a head down position. And then perform the following exercises. Let go of the air in your mouth. Blow it out into the water. Recover the air. Equalize. Blow it out. Recover the air. Equalize. Then come up. Now, you should be able to do this about 3 times. Look, if you can recover the air each time, that's about 90% success. What we're not doing here is we're not increasing the depth, because we can't go beyond the 4 meters because somebody's put a stupid floor there. Okay. So because we're not changing the depth, don't be disappointed if your equalizations each time are less or nearly non-existent, because you don't need to equalize again. This is merely an attempt to see if you can do the maneuver. Okay, when you can do that, then we start doing other things in a 4-meter pool. We start going down totally empty lung and with an empty mouth, maybe for 1.5 or 2 meters maximum, stopping and refilling, filling the cheeks, going down to the bottom, empty and refilling, and working a little bit deeper each time, maybe 50 centimeters at the most, each session that we do it, in order to get the idea of easy, smooth, and not very aggressive recovery. Now, if people are losing air by going back into their lungs, and some people do this immediately after the duck dive, turning over. For some reason, they open the epiglottis a little bit. What I advise you to do is a very slight udayana, a very slight diaphragmic lift. This makes a little bit of suction there and keeps the epiglottis shut. Certainly helps to do that. Right, now there's more parts to his question. How can you prepare, in your opinion, in 30 meters depth quarry for a 100-meter dive in terms of equalization? Absolutely ideal. Yeah. I'm not going to discuss, and I don't want to know what the temperature of that quarry is. Because if it's in Poland, I have strong suspicions that you probably need a tractor to drive out onto the quarry, yeah, with an auger on the back to drill a hole in the ice to get in. So we'll not discuss temperature here and its effects on equalization. I'm just taking it that it might be some sane temperature. The first thing that I would do is exactly, if you go to my blog, Matt, and you look what we were doing with David, more or less the same thing, but I'd adapt it to your circumstances. I would begin with gradually deeper and deeper, totally empty lung exercises, where you're taking a full mouthfill on the surface, and eventually you'll be working down, you'll be able to work down to at least 20 meters with that. Okay, now start monitoring yourself. Is the equalization smooth? Is it quick? Start playing with the speeds at which you go down. The idea being that it's one thing to have the technique off pat, one thing that we're helping with the flexibility to prepare ourselves for real deep diving, another thing that we are actually simulating depth, but one of the elements that's missing is speed of equalization. So how do we get that? Well, I would think about drops on FRC to 30 meters, how much FRC. The normal definition of FRC, as I understand it, is a inhalation, a tidal volume, and a passive exhalation. In other words, don't take a big breath and a passive exhalation, but a normal breath and then a passive exhalation and go. Now, playing around with the quantities of air, you can use FRC to do drops to 30 meters. And if you have a good, reliable partner who can dive to at least 30 meters, or a system of recovery, like a counterweight or anything else, or somebody who can pull you up, because I mean you won't be using, if it's a quarry, I presume that we're talking about fresh water, so I presume we're not talking about great amounts of weight. So somebody lying on a buoy can, if he's strong enough, it's not a slightly built girl, I mean, should be able to pull you up if you haven't got weight on for this, which you shouldn't. So you can do drops with that. You can do later on, and this has to be done with a great deal of coordination of safety, drops on FRC and hold at the bottom. I don't recommend, I know you've got a damn good breath hold, Mac. I don't recommend, even with your breath hold, from a safety point of view, I wouldn't recommend going over on FRC more than a 1 minute breath hold on the bottom on FRC. Also, all these exercises give you the ideal tool to work out what's happening here. When I get to my target depth, whether it's 4 meters in the pool or whether it's 30 meters in the quarry, do I have air in my mouth? Can I use the air and equalize? Or do I have air in my mouth and I can't access it? Then I have a soft palate problem. I don't have any air in my mouth, and I suspect that probably for the last 2 or 3 meters I didn't have any air in my mouth either. In other words, I swallowed or lost my air. You have a problem with the epiglottis. There are all ways of dealing with this. One is change your equalization totally. Another way is do the exercises for the necessary part of the body, whether it's your soft palate or your epiglottis, and solve that individually. Right, another thing you said is, with FRC and empty lungs, you don't build up CO2 in your body because you're negatively buoyant from the beginning. So you free fall from the surface, which makes mouthfill easy once you've developed flexibility in your chest. You're right. Yeah. Yeah, you are. But the question is, how much in a 100-meter dive, the question is, where are you going to be building up, start really building up CO2? If you're building up a lot of CO2 on your descent, you're doing something wrong. If you're building up CO2 on the ascent, tough luck, that's part of the dive. And what I recommend is what we talked about before, Matt, which is specifically a lot during the winter of lactic training. And the most extreme lactic training, and probably one of the best lactic trainings, is dry training. If you have screwed up legs and cannot do hill repeats, you can always go to a very nice little video on YouTube of Michael Phelps without a monofin in an upright position, and I believe something like an 8-kilo weight belt. I wouldn't start with 8 kilos if I was you. Doing a monofin movement and keeping half his body out of the water. That's more or less. I hope I've answered the question there, Matt. If I've missed something there, do stick in a note and wave a flag, and I'll come back to it. Milena, who's a long-time friend and from Serbia, who's just taken up training for 5 months after a 5-year break, where she wants to do 100 meters DNF, but so far I've never tried packing. In your opinion, should I try to pack? Milena, it depends where you are. Packing is effective for the pool disciplines. It has a lot of advantages for the pool disciplines and few of the disadvantages that packing has for depth diving. Difficulty is this, where you bring it in your training. I prefer to go as much as possible without packing. I even go quite a lot in the beginning of dynamic training on dynamic totally empty lungs, which of course packing has no part in at all. This gets one psychologically used to the feeling of a different feeling about CO2, a feeling of discomfort which is different from the discomfort that you feel on full lungs. In pool diving, as opposed to deep diving, you probably want to bring in packing a little bit earlier into your training, because it's going to radically affect your buoyancy and your balance and what kind of neck weight you'll be using and everything else. That takes some time to work out. I would bring it in also. You don't want to bring in by doing something like 20 packs at the beginning or anything else. I'd bring it in with a very modest number of packs, 3 or 4 packs right at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, let's say from now, and very gradually increase. So that's a story about that, Milena. I hope that answers your question. If I knew exactly where you were in your training and everything else, I'd be happy to talk to you on Skype. We yap anyway from time to time, so we can discuss this. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it on the webinar. Right, I see that we're pretty much going over time a little bit. So here's a few things. From now, round about the 3rd of June, and for 2 weeks, which I think takes me up to what, the 21st of
18th.
June? 18th of June. I'm in Dahab, where I will not be doing a webinar. It's complicated for me to do it there, and anyway, I'm very involved in training somebody there. So when I get back to Eilat from Dahab is when we'll be doing the next webinar, which will be, Alina, when? After the 18th. When's the 18th? The 18th is on what?
Here.
What day of the week?
Tuesday, so you can do 19th.
Okay, so we will have a webinar on the 19th. All things being equal. I'm going to try and be prepared to have a webinar on the 19th. Very much enjoyed your questions tonight. Thank you very much for the people who asked them. Milena, Matt, Stephen, who else? Wait a minute, let me go back. And I missed somebody. Wow.
Yeah, you did.
You
did.
Wait a minute. Get that up for me.
Oh. It's erased already.
I what?
Andreas.
Andreas, of course. I'm sorry, Andreas. So thank you, all of you, for your questions. They're very interesting and very good questions. Thanks for attending. And we'll see you again, hopefully, on the 19th. There's a gentleman in Sharm who says something about enjoy the blue and dive safe. So I'll borrow that from you.
You will be happy to meet old and new friends in Dahab.
Yes, if any of you are in Dahab, I'll be very, very happy to meet you. I may stay on in Dahab to do a little bit of training after the 18th. I'm not sure of that yet. But anyway, watch out for the posts. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight.
Stefan just wrote, thank you very much.
And safe diving to all of you. Good night.